All right, let's jump in. Matthew 25, verse 1. Like I said, big Bible study together. If you haven't been with us, we're just going to go through this verse by verse. I feel like that's the best way to understand the Bible. That's what we've been doing in Matthew. Here it is. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. Immediately, there's like a lot of questions on the table, okay? So first off, Matthew 25 is in light, of course, of Matthew 24, which we spent 2 weeks on talking about Matthew 24. Here's what I want you to know, though. If you grew up in church, maybe Awanas or VBS, you're kind of a Bible nerd. I think, if I was to ask you, tell me a chapter in the Bible that has to do about the end times, you probably would say Matthew 24. What I think is missed in modern evangelicalism is Matthew 24 and Matthew 25 go hand in glove. They go together. Think of Matthew 25 as a response to all the deep eschatological truths that we looked at in Matthew 24. In the same way, when you read Ephesians 1, 2, and 3, that talk about deep soteriological, which is deep issues of salvation, and then 4, 5, and 6 in Ephesians is a response to what God has done in your salvation. When you read Romans chapters 1 through 11, it's this deep, weighty theology. Well, starting in chapter 12, therefore, present your bodies. It's a response to all chapters before that in Romans 1 through 11, right? In the same way, Matthew 24 gives us, here's some deep theological eschatology. 25 is a response to those truths, okay? That being said, when we look at verse 1 and it says, then the kingdom of heaven will be like, the first thing we have to kind of Rolodex into our mind and go back to is Matthew 13. Now, if you were with us in Matthew 13, you remember that it's called the chapter, the parables of the kingdom. And what Jesus kept saying is the kingdom of heaven is like, the kingdom of heaven is like, the kingdom of heaven is like. And we got all these parables. But notice the difference today. There's a difference, isn't there? Notice it's not the kingdom of heaven is like. Notice it's in the future tense, the kingdom of heaven will be like. In Matthew 13, we said there's a future dynamic to the kingdom as well. Even though as believers, right now we experience, because of the Holy Spirit, Ephesians chapter 1, as we're receiving a down payment, we experience the kingdom in some way. Okay, well, one day there's a king, one day there's a fulfillment, one day. So that's that kind of element of that, okay? So then the kingdom of heaven will be like, and here it is, it sounds odd, especially you've never been to church before, talking about 10 virgins, will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom, all right? I got to set us up a context before we read all that is about to happen. So here's where I would start. Last night, I did the ceremony for Connor and Belle. They got married, which was awesome. Well, a week, yep, all right, that's excellent. So they're not here, right? They should be on their honeymoon. Okay, that'd be great. That'd be weird. We know what you did last night. No, stop. Grow up. Talking got married. Okay. So what was I saying? What were we talking about? Oh, okay. So a week before the ceremony, Belle and Connor sent out a 19-page PDF of all things going on this weekend, right? And that sounds like a lot. To be honest with you, though, there's a lot of moving pieces to it. And on this thing, it's when vendors are to arrive, and there's a mood board, which is now a thing, I guess, right? It's like, it's what we want everything to feel like and all this. But there's a lot that goes on with family planning, all that stuff. They're coming in, flights. You got the rehearsal. We're practicing not even at the same place the wedding is. And then you got to plan food. Just a lot. There's a lot to plan. So it takes a lot of work. Now, here's what's crazy. For the most part, though, when we think of a wedding, we honestly, intuitively have culturally been framed in such a way that we know what's going to happen. Nobody goes to a wedding and thinks first the bride's going to come out, then the bridesmaids and groomsmen. We know there's an order. There's a structure to this. We know we're going to get there. We know that the procession's going to take place and probably a ring bearer, a flower girl. Then there's going to be the bride that comes out. We know that there might be like some kind of cocktail hour afterwards. Then we're going to eat together. There's this order. There's this structure that we are kind of intuitively aware of. Now, here's why I say all of that, okay? Not all cultures do what we do. Not all cultures did what we did last night. For the most part, as Westerners, that's what we're used to. And so there's pieces that we've got to understand. When we see this, there's movements that we're not aware of that Jesus and the original audience is. So let me explain what those things are, because honestly, it's a little bit helpful. So here's what goes on. So the groom is going to take some of his buddies, all the groomsmen, best way to think about it. They're going to leave their house, and they're going to go to the bride's house, most likely with his family. They're going to go to the bride's house. And when they go to the bride's house, it's going to be during the day. And just so you know, I'm not making all this up. You can read any commentary. We have a lot of knowledge when it comes to different ceremonies with different cultures, but we have a ton of writing on how first century Palestinian Jews got married. So this is about 99% accurate of what took place. So he's going to take his family, he's going to go to the bride's house, and that's when they're going to do the vows, the nuptials, all that stuff. There's kind of commitment, all that's going to take a little bit of time for them to do. And then what's going to happen is they together are going to leave in a procession all together, every single one of them holding a lampstand together, and they're going to go back to the groom's house, okay? This is the taking away of the bride back to the groom's house. And usually it's kind of villages that are closer, but it could be a little bit of a long walk. But when they do all of this, they're going to wait until night. They're going to do some pieces that, maybe we're not used to, and then they're going to go. Now, here's what happens. The bridesmaids, that's what I want you to hear when you hear the 10 virgins. It's not exact apples to apples, but the bridesmaids serve an integral part of all this because they help set everything up at the bride's house, but then they're going to go ahead and they're going to wait for the procession at the groom's house. So they're going to go. Now, if you've ever been a part of a different kind of cultural wedding before, like for example, my wife and I have been a part of a lot of Nigerian weddings, right? And I've been in a few, and they have different elements to this where the bride's parents are receiving all these gifts. They come in, the groom's parents are bringing in like literally pallets of soda and goats and all this stuff. Well, there's this part in the ceremony, and I love it. I loved when I was part of a couple of these Nigerian weddings, is where the groom has to identify his bride. Because they're gonna cloak one of the bridesmaids in the same clothes that she's wearing, and they're gonna come out and keep her covered, and they're gonna go, we'd like to present the bride, and the groom has to decide, nah, that's my bride, right? And you don't want to get that wrong, right? So a lot of times, and it's all in jest, it's all in fun. We're like, no, that's not my bride, send her back. I want my bride, right? So all this idea. My point is, our basic study of most encounters when it comes to these types of ceremonies is groomsmen and bridesmaids always played an integral part. And so what Jesus is doing is he's leveraging that knowledge that the bridesmaids played an integral part of this ceremony. So these 10 virgins go ahead and they're going to wait for this procession to come, all right? That's our context. That's what's going on. So when it says they took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom, they're coming out from the groom's house to meet the bridegroom. But here is what happens. There's 10 of them. 5 of them were foolish. 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight, there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet him." Now, there's a couple more details that we need to know about this. Is when these 5 wise and 5 foolish bridesmaids or these virgins, they're waiting for the processions to come back. They all have these lampstands, right? Maybe you've seen pictures of this, these kind of dome-shaped things that need oil. And so the way that they're delineated between 5 wise and 5 foolish is the same way we can probably think of 2 different people deciding to drive to Montana, right? One is going to go, we got 1 tank of gas and I'm going to make it, right? The other is going, that's not a good idea. You're going to have to get gas at some point. So you bring a card, you bring cash because we know we're going to have to do it. That's what's happening here. Well, the bridegroom is delayed. It's now midnight and this procession's coming. Now, here's a detail that you need to be aware of. And D.A. Carson was emphatic on this. Every single person in this procession, friends, family, think of during the cocktail hour, instead of standing around at a wedding, you together are talking and joking, but you're walking to the groom's house together. But before you leave the bride's house, it's made sure that you're given a lamp, okay? Now, there's a reason for this. Either the groom's parents have either designed a lamp or had these lamps made for you, or there's something tied onto that lamp to identify your part of the procession. And it's done for safety. Because this walk, you could have vagrants or party crashers jump in to the procession, because these are large processions, and enter into the wedding feast. And so it's for the sake of protection that everybody has to have a lampstand. And so as they're going towards it, everybody's got one. Well, these 10 are waiting with their lampstands. 5 realize, as we're about to read, wait a minute, the groom is delayed. Now we hear it, oh my gosh, it's midnight, we fell asleep. They all wake up. Fortunately, 5 of them were prepared, but 5 of them weren't. And so here's what happens in verse 7. Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will be not enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourself." So that's gangster right there. No, we ain't taking it. You're on your own. And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. So the city would still be, even though you think kind of sunset, city's asleep, shops are going to be open if they're aware of this procession. Some of them would even be a part of it. We know human beings, if there's money to be made, money's going to be made. So 5 of them go, hey, can I borrow some of that oil, right? Same question, can I use some gas? And the guy's like, I don't have enough to pay for your car to get there and my car to get there. It's not going to happen. So they got to go to these dealers to buy more oil, right? So they go off. Well, while they're gone, the procession comes in, right? So that's exactly what happens. And when the procession comes in, the door, you can see it there in verse 10, the door is shut. Well, afterwards, these 5 foolish virgins come with now the right amount of oil, but it's too late. Verse 11, afterward, the other virgins came also saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered, truly, I say to you, I do not know you. Now you, of course, can ask, wouldn't he know them? Well, maybe, but don't lose, it's a parable, right? So don't get lost in the details of this and miss the forest and the trees. The point is they left, they weren't ready, and then they came back. So the first thing we got to begin to ask is, like, what does it mean? What does all this mean, Basil? How do we navigate the pieces of parables? Well, there's a few things, 4 things I want you to be aware of. Number 1, this parable is pretty debated, whether you're dispensational or covenantal, in light of Matthew 24. Maybe it's referring to Jews and saved, not saved. So there's some of those elements. There's also some elements in this, like, for example, the oil and the shops could mean something. Some have argued the oil means salvation. I don't know if the dealers, there's some things I don't want to get lost in. I think there are clear movements that we can say. For example, the bridegroom, you can see him there. I think that's a reference to Jesus. Jesus is telling this parable. We know twice in Isaiah, in Hosea, either 2:17 or 2:19, God describes himself as the bride of Israel, and Jesus picks up on that motif in all 4 Gospels. I think Mark 2, Matthew 9, John 3, picks up on that idea that Jesus is the bridegroom. We know from Ephesians 5 that the church is the bride. So we can see we have the bridegroom, the bride. And I'll honestly say, I think at a large, simple level, the 10 virgins are representative of the saved and not saved. This is speaking to in light of, remember, this is all eschatological, all end time stuff. In light of end times, the conversation of final judgment, there are people who, like, at the last minute, oh my, I was wrong. Well, it's too late at that point. When Jesus, it's too late. And I think that's what it's speaking to. Now, that being said, I could be totally off on all the pieces of the parable. The good news is verse 13 actually just tells us the point of the parable. Why are you actually giving? Maybe we're missing the pieces. We don't fully know. We can at least walk away and go, here's the lesson I should learn. Verse 13, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. I've said this 1,000 times, but if you see that word therefore, ask, why is it there, right? And so you can almost switch around watch and therefore. You could say therefore watch, but the idea is the same. In light of this parable, right? Okay, watch this, because here's the deal. Watch, be watchful. Here's why. Because you don't know the day or the hour. Or maybe it's simply, you don't know when he's coming, so don't be like the 5 foolish virgins. We can step back with the parable and go, at minimum, we know that's true. You need to be ready for when he returns. And so let's kind of make this as practical as possible. Some of you guys are on your way to finishing your degree. You finish your degree, awesome. Like, you finish that degree, great. Okay, are you ready, though, for his return? Like, man, you found the one. Like, you're going to get married. That's awesome. But are you ready for his return? Like, keep going on in your life. You now have a family. You have kids. Amazing. But are you ready for his return? I found the job I've been waiting to get. Great. Are you ready for his return? You've got retirement. You've got grandkids. You've got passive income. All amazing. But are you ready for his return? Whatever stage you're finding yourself in, the question that pops off from this parable of going, I don't, in any of these seasons, want to be like the 5 foolish virgins. I want to be ready for his return. Okay? Now, if you're a pragmatist, you're going, that sounds amazing, but how do I stay ready? What does it look like? Your adrenal glands will explode if you're always like, now, right? Like, how do you know when to be ready? How to be ready? And I think this is why these 2 parables are meant to be read together. I think these go hand in glove. I think this leads us to the second parable. So let's read the second parable and hopefully answer that question, okay? So in light of that, what does it look like to be ready? We get verse 14. For it will be like a man, another parable, going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them to his property. Everything that we saw in verse 1, then the kingdom of heaven will be like, is summed up in the word it there, isn't it? Right? What is it? Well, the kingdom of heaven. It's going to be, it will be like, this time not 10 virgins, but this time it's going to be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. That word there, property, can be a little bit tricky. I know some of your translations say differently. The best way to understand that word property is probably the word resources. I like the word property. I think it's helpful. But think of this guy who has a lot of resources. He's got liquid cash. He's got land. He's got homes on that land. He's got business. He's got all these things going on. Okay, so here's this guy who has a lot. He calls his servants and he entrusts portions of what he has to these servants. Verse 15, to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his own ability, and then he went away. So now we're entering into the space of this parable. This guy owns a lot, and think of just 5 types of resources. There's 5 talents. The word talents is debated, but it's for sure millions of dollars in resources. So a lot, he gives 5, another he gives 2, and another he gives 1, based on where he thinks they are. Simple enough, okay? He's not done. Verse 16, he who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had 2 talents made 2 talents more, but he who had received the 1 talent went, dug it in the ground, and hid his master's money. In short, the guy who had 5, let's just say 5 pieces of property was able to kind of finagle, sell, put it whatever he needs to do, and he made 5 more pieces of property. The guy was given 5 houses. He was able to sell, end up buying 5. He's got 2 houses. Or sorry, that guy had 2. 2 made 4 houses, and then there's this guy who had 1 area of resource, and he just dug a hole and buried it in the ground. Think of like a coin. Let's just say cash. Digs a hole, buries it in the ground, doesn't invest it, doesn't, nothing, no interest on it, nothing. He just digs a hole. Now we're told that's what they do. Okay, well, here's what happens in verse 19. After a long time, now I want you to hear that. Remember in our other parable, he was delayed. That delayed motif is still in here, right? So now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made you 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Now listen to the tone change here, okay? Verse 24. So the first 2, they did well. They doubled the money. That's awesome. Verse 24. He who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you had scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered no seed? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. Now, the scene obviously changes dramatically for obviously 2 reasons. Number 1, instead of going with this kind of reverence to the master, there's this sense of kind of honoriness. There's this sense now, 2 parts. One is he calls him a hard man. Some of you guys, translations, it says cruel. I think that's a helpful translation, like merciless, or another word I wrote down here is harsh. Some of your translations say harsh, right? So this is the way I know you. The second way he describes, and look at verse 24, he accuses him of taking what's not his. You scattered seed that wasn't yours. You threw out the seed and you gathered the harvest where you didn't scatter, right? So on one side, he accuses him of being cruel. The other side, he's going of being almost unjust. And I would agree with D.A. Carson. 2 things are happening. The master speaks to the servant in not hypothetical, a sarcastic kind of tone. Oh, if that's what you knew to be true of me, then this is what you should have done, right? So if that's all true of me, oh yeah, that's how you knew me? Okay. And ultimately what D.A. Carson says is what the master, I think, is describing is they're masking their slothfulness and their laziness, and they're blaming it on the master. They're blaming it on the master. So what ends up happening is the camera changes here. I want you to know, look at verse 28. Now the master is interacting with the servant with 1 talent, but now he seems to be talking to someone else. I don't know if it's a guard over. I don't know what happens, but the camera angle changes, or at least the line of communication changes. So take the talent away from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. I don't know who he's talking to at this point. For to everyone who has will be given more, or I'm sorry, let me say that again. Who has will more be given. I can't stand when they do that stuff like that. And he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So verse 28, you can see, describes the servant with the 1 talent. Can you see that? That's like what even he has, he's going to lose. He's not only is he not going to get more, he's going to lose that. 29 takes that principle and broadens it. Can you see that there? It takes the idea when it uses that language for to everyone. Now we get to step back and do the same thing we did with the 10 virgins. Let's ask this question. Okay, what are the pieces? There's pieces on the board here. What does each one represent? This one's a little bit more clear though, isn't it? Right? So first you have the master, which clearly seems to be God. Servants are representative of people. And I think talents or properties are honestly just like resources, the way that we can think resources, that human beings have been given things. That's the best way that I can describe it. I will say it's interesting though, if we're going to ask what the point is, because as often as I've heard this text preached or shared, it's removed from the, again, eschatological or the end times context that it is in. And so it seems to be missed. It's always almost described as like spiritual gifts. You as a believer have been given spiritual gifts. And it's not that I necessarily disagree with that, and it's crazy to hear this from a pastor, but I think that's too spiritual, to be honest with you. I think it misses the mark of what's going on at a larger level. Spurgeon says sometimes we over-spiritualize the text in lectures to my students. Ironically, he over-spiritualized the text a lot. But he's like, that's one thing we need to be aware of, to not do that. And I think that's what we're doing here. You've been given this spiritual gift, and you need to do something with it. And I don't know if that's necessarily at least all of the truth. So I have a couple quotes I want to share with you guys. I did not give them the sound booth this week because last week I gave 39 slides to them, so I wanted to give them the week off. So you're just going to have to use your brains and listen up. Kevin Voss describes these talents, not in that way, but here's how he describes it. He says, they represent all the good things that God has given us. Or as D.A. Carson says it, I'll read this slow because I know it's not on the screen. From the time of creation of mankind, each individual has been entrusted with the resources of time and material wealth. Since the beginning of creation, every single one of us, every person in this room, we've been entrusted by God with something, okay? Everything that we have comes from God and belongs to Him. We are responsible for using those resources so that they increase in value. And then this last statement, we are accountable to the Lord for the use of His resources. In short, you have two options as a human being. Option one, the things that you have that God has given you, you can say, this is all about me, I'm going to do what I want with them. Or option two, recognize they are a gift from God and allocate in such a way that is to the glory of God. Those are the two options. That's what's in front of us. And I think D.A. Carson is right in that, which brings about our tone, doesn't it? I've tried to explain to us as a congregation for years now, when you read the Bible, there's not just a text, but there's always a tone you got to read into it. Like, for example, Psalm 139 reads different than Revelation 19, doesn't it? There's a difference to, I knit you together in my mother's womb, and I'm coming with blood running in the streets. There's different tones to that. And so sometimes we don't want to navigate the tone, but this tone in particular seems to be one in light of Matthew 25 being, in the context of Matthew 24, a little bit of fire and brimstone. Like, what's put in front of us right now is that God has given you all that you have, but you're acting like the 5 foolish virgins, and you're squandering it. You're being lazy. All the while, you're blaming God. And so let me ask you this question. Do you honestly believe you're the hardest working person in the world? Do you genuinely not believe that there are other people that work harder than you do out there? I remember being in Ghana, Africa, and watching 4 guys in about 12 hours by hand with sticks. I don't mean sticks with shovels. I mean just sticks. Dig out an entire pool in the motel that we were staying in. And it's 13 hours of like just straight work. They had like 15-minute breaks, so 12 hours of manual labor just on the grind. And so have you ever watched the daily worker, like a manual labor work? Have you seen how hard they work? Let me ask you a question. Why do you have more than them then? If all things are equal and they work harder than you, why do you have more? Did you will where you were born? You manifested those resources to be? Are you better than them? I mean, like, just reconcile this in your mind. There are people who are literally born as vegetables. They're brain dead. Did you, in the womb, will the synapse in your brain to come into being? That was you. No, of course not. Absolutely not. Everything that you have and I don't know why, but in his sovereignty, he has given it to you. The way you process life, why you're good with numbers, the amount of resources in money or in homes or business, what you have in education, the opportunities, the position, it has been given to you. And the two options in front of you, you can make it about you and you can be foolish. And when he returns, you're going to stand in judgment. Or option two, make it about him, cultivate, subdue, and live for his glory. Those are the options. And what I think is interesting is the divide is what's tripping us up on this. The divide that you think that when Jesus returns, unless you're worshiping, unless you're in prayer of some kind, and he returns, you're going to be held accountable. But you miss the whole thing. Like what's being put in front of us is small incremental things. The way you live in one way represents, are you ready? So to answer this question, how can I be ready? Like the 5 faithful virgins, is the faithfully with the energy he gives you to work for his kingdom every single day in all things, in everything. Now, you may not believe everything that I'm saying here, so I made a list just in case you're wondering. Let's just assume Jesus comes on some random Tuesday. Here's what's going to be happening on a Tuesday, which would be wild if he did, right? I'm a prophet, okay? He comes on a Tuesday. He's going to come on a Tuesday while you're changing a diaper, while you're writing that paper, while you're serving that table, while you're helping that patient, while you're fixing that tire, while you're scrolling that phone, you're driving that car, ordering that food, running that business, unclogging that pipe, drinking that coffee, making that art, while you're exercising, talking, fantasizing, digging, folding, sleeping, parenting, learning, food prepping. I have no idea, okay? But he's not going to come when you're like, Lord, I lift your name on high, okay? It's a throwback right there, right? That's not what's going to happen. It's not going to, most likely, it is going to happen in an ordinary thing. So let me ask you this question. In light of the 10 virgins and then these talents that God has given you all the resources which require you to live into the minute details of your life, are you ready in those things? That he would return while you're like serving the table, while you're helping this person, and you go, Lord, I'm doing this to the best of my ability for your glory. And I want your kingdom to be multiplied. Again, it's not on the screen, but my man Spurge has something to say about it. He says, some people seem to think that hard work is attending to ordinary business. Some people think that the hard work in attending to ordinary business is not spiritually minded as a Christian. He says, with an emphatic exclamation point, nonsense. The truest Christian is the working man who so labors for God that he does not neglect the common duties of life. So what's put in front of us is these, that statement's super helpful, the common duties of life. So now we go back, the 10 virgins are saying, you need to be ready. You need to be ready. Okay, how do I be ready? Well, he's given you things to work this stuff out, to be faithful, to stop being lazy, to stop being slothful with all that you have. And go, Lord, I want to live for your glory in everything that you've given me. Now, of course, before I pray, this does require us to acknowledge the fact that being ready is not only on us, because here's what we do know. We will fail more times than not at what I just laid out, okay? So we do need to strive, according to Colossians 1, with all of his energy. We need to do that. We need to rely on the Holy Spirit as he's doing, wants to do good works within us. But at the same time, we will fail. And so this, of course, is where the person giving us the parable comes into clear view. Because now we see Jesus as not just our example, but when we fail, we're reminded of the elements. We're reminded why we receive communion. Until the day that he returns, why as believers we will continue to do this. Because when we fail, his grace is enough. And we're not doing it to earn our justification. We're doing it because of our justification. Because he has saved us and the joy that he's placed within us. God, I want to respond with all that I have. And there's moments where I fail. There's moments where I falter. There's moments where I do not get it right. And that is true for believers. And if you base your salvation on that, you've completely missed it. But as John Del Husse says, this passage does bring a wholesome uncomfortability to us, doesn't it? Because at the same time as believers, we should try to think of ways of, how can I be more faithful? That should be real at the same time. And so that's what we'll do. Let's pray.